All right. So this is basically, let's recap actually what's happening in this script. So the first session we looked at strokes, fills, basically drawing shapes, a loop that is done with this while loop, and basically drawing on the canvas, right? If you remember, create canvas basically has a width and a height, and this sets the pixel dimension for our canvas. So if I were to, for instance, change this, let's say to 720 to 720, that will be a square canvas now. And frame rate, well, it's actually not used at this stage. It's used to actually draw like update on screen, so we don't need to use it. Background is the background color. So actually, let's debug this. Let's actually comment this out and see what's kind of going on step by step. Background basically sets a background color, so I chose this color, and this is here. Before the while loop, what I'm doing is I'm setting no stroke value, a rectangle mode, so that when we draw a rectangle, if you remember, we have, if you do center mode, it means we specify the center of the rectangle, and this becomes W and this becomes height, right? So when I, for instance, use it here, the first two parameters are X and Y. So this is X, this is Y, this is width, this is height. And angle mode, I specified degrees, which was used basically for these transformations that I stopped doing actually, but maybe we can look at it again. And let's actually comment this out. While I smaller than 500, so what does that mean? So I'm going to comment this section out. So if you remember, this is a loop, so it's triggered by this condition, right? So what this means is if this condition is true, then stay inside of this loop. That's all that it does basically. So we start I as a variable. So let I basically assigns 0 to the variable I. And when I say while I is smaller than 500, this statement is true because initially I is 0. And if you don't have a way of terminating this while loop, then you will basically create a stack overflow. So you will create an infinite loop here. So what we do is we increment I by 1. So every time I is incremented when I becomes 500, 500 is not less than 500. It's an equality. So this will be false. And when it's false, the while loop will stop, basically. Okay, so that's kind of a basic loop that we are creating here. So when I run this, you can see I commented these sections out, but what it does is it assigns a stroke value that is between a green and a blue tone. So these are RGB values, so red, green, and blue. And then I assign a stroke weight, which basically specifies the thickness of these lines. Then get a random X and a Y value for the location of the line, and increment the Y with kind of a random multiplication or a random dimension extracted from the height value of the canvas. So these are some sort of automated formulas, right? So I'm using some innate variables inside the program. And what this does is it basically draws multiple lines vertically. And if I were to like reduce this while loop, you will have less lines. So this is only 100 lines. Let's actually increase the stroke weight as well, so you can have thicker lines, right? So these are all basically controls of how the sketch is being drawn. Then in the second part, what I do is I get a random fill value, no stroke this time, so no border contour, and draw a random rectangle. And that's basically these guys. So these guys are kind of another tone of a similar color, but I'm assigning an alpha value in this case. So the fill stroke values basically take RGB values, red, green, and blue, that are between 0 and 255. 0 is closer to black, 255 is closer to white. And if you give a fourth parameter, that will be an alpha value. So this will be basically in the format of red, green, blue, and alpha, right? So that's kind of what the inputs are. So everything inside the parentheses are basically the parameters, and they're separated by commas. So these are the rectangles, and the last one is the circle. So the circles are orange, so they're in different sizes. The circle parameters is location, x and y, and a random radius. So that's what we get basically. So if you increment the number, this operation inside the loop is replicated, so it's done multiple times, right? So we can increase the amount of times we want it to be done. And we can also change some parameters. Let's actually reduce the width of the rectangles and maybe reduce the size of the circles. So we get a different type of sketch. So all of these could be kind of variations of the script, right? So they will create different type of drawings. And we are not doing anything inside draw because this is a static image. If you remember, setup is only called once, where we set up the program functions or the program parameters. And then in draw, draw is basically called multiple times. So we are updating the canvas, right? So we can, if I draw something here, that will be replicated. Okay, any questions up until now? Okay, if not, we're going to do another exercise today and learn about some fundamentals. So what I want to do is basically get you familiar with for loops today. And we're going to draw a grid of objects and look at some geometric functions like shapes as well. So how can we draw polygons or irregular shapes, let's say. So we're going to create kind of a gridded object space. What I want to do first is go over the canvas. Let's actually do this quiz. So when I say create canvas 400 by 400, so what do we what are we working with? So the width is 400 pixels and the height is 400 pixels, right? So this side is the origin. So this bottom left corner, and that's the first pixel. So it's 0, 0. Who can tell me what's the index of this pixel is? Can you write in the chat or maybe turn on your mic? $399 by $399, right? So it's X and Y. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is, let's say we want to draw a bunch of objects on this canvas. So first of all, let me actually increase the size of this canvas. So let's make it 800 by 800. So what I want to do is, let's actually keep it in the middle on this axis. I want to draw rectangles here like this, rectangles separated by some dimension or distance, and I want them to fit like all the way here. So we're going to create kind of an array, and I want to create the number of them and the size of them, or vice versa. So we're going to start by understanding how this could be done actually, right? So first things first, we draw the canvas here so we can actually move this here. So we don't need to actually do any dynamic draw. We can only do it in the setup. So if you remember, we can look at our reference. Let's actually find it here. How do we draw a rectangle? We use the rect mode. So the rect mode is basically specifies how you want to input the parameters of a rectangle, right? So if you specify corner, then it draws the white rectangle using corner mode. And basically the first two parameters will be the left top corner, and then these will be the width and height of the rectangle, right? So we can use the left top corner of the rectangle to draw it. So that's kind of one way. The other way is you can specify corners. So I guess the corners means you basically specify the left top and the right bottom, probably. So these are like two different rectangle modes. Maybe we actually play around with this a bit. Radius is, I think, similar to circle, how we draw the circle. And center is, I guess, specifying center and dimensions, width and height. So these are all different ways of drawing the rectangle. What about circles? So I'm actually thinking maybe we should start with circles. So what if we pack circles on a line? It will be actually a bit easier. So let's do X and Y and a dimension for the diameter of the circle. Okay, so how do we do this? So first things first, let's draw a fill. Let's call our fill black, right? So this is our fill. Then I'm going to do a circle. And let's draw the circle at 50-50 and radius 5. Okay. So that's kind of small. Let's actually make it a bit larger. Let's make it 50. So when we do 50-50, what it means is we are at the 50-50 pixel, which specifies the center. And the second dimension is the diameter, right? So the diameter is the full width and height of the circle. So what if I want to draw 10 circles horizontally? How can I do that? So you remember we actually looked at the while loop, but if we want to specify, let's say, an iterator base, like we want to increment some values and control the number of items we want to do or the interval of how we want to do them, we can use a for loop. Now, the for loop is actually written like this. So we do for let equals I smaller than 10, I plus plus, and open curly parentheses and open curly brackets and close curly brackets. So this is kind of our for loop. And inside of it, I'm just going to print the value of I so that we can see what happens inside the console. So whenever I print something, the console would actually print me the value. So let's see, I made a mistake here. For let I equals 0. So when I run this, what happens is, so we specify I as a variable inside the for loop condition, and I starts at 0, and we want to keep I less than 10, and we want to increment it by 1, right? So this is what happens inside here. So this for loop basically iterates through I variable until this condition is not met. So it's kind of like similar to a while loop, but we have multiple parameters. Basically, we have a variable, we have a condition for it, and we have an iterator for it, right? So we increment it. Okay, so if I want to create, let's say, a different type of number sequence, for instance, we can make it start by 5, right? So if I say let I equals 5, I smaller than 10, I plus plus, that will start from 5, go up to 10. We can also make this smaller and equal to. What that does is it will also enable I to be 10, so we will also print 10. We can also do plus equals 2, and let's make this 20. And what that does is we will increment by 2, right? So we can specify the starting value, the terminating condition, and how we want to increment the value. And this could be positive or negative, any way you want to specify, right? So I'm going to start with 0, increment it by intervals of 2, so 0 to 4 up to 20. Okay, so that's kind of a default for loop. Any questions about the for loop? Does that make sense, how this is done? So it's a bit different than while loop. If you remember, while loop is like this. So while, so let's x equals 0, let's say, while x is smaller than 20, x plus plus, it increments x variable, and then we can do print x. Let's do it like this actually. And I'm going to do here printing I values, and here printing x values. So we can separate how these two things are done. So I'm going to make this up to 5. Okay, so the first for loop, printing I values. So we print from starting from 0 to 20, and then the while loop basically runs in a similar fashion, but it's written like this. So we start with a variable or a condition, and we want to be inside the while loop while this condition is true, and we increment x so that this doesn't create an infinite loop. So it's another way of basically creating a loop inside the for loop, but we can have more control over how we want to iterate. We can have multiple statements specified. Okay, so next step is I'm going to create an array of circles. So let's start by thinking about this a bit. So let's say that our radius value is 50. So, sorry, the diameter value is 50. So what I want to do is maybe I want to specify how many number of circles I want. So let's actually give these some names. So I'm going to define as variables. So I'm going to say let num circle equals 5. Let's say we want to have 5 circles. Let d circle, which is the diameter, equals 50. Okay, and then we're going to have x and y values. So I'm going to comment this out. So num circle, I can already use it here, right? And we can keep I as 0. But since we start with 0 and we want to have 5 values, I'm going to keep it as smaller than 5. And x plus equals 1, or x plus plus. Okay, x plus plus means x plus equals 1. So it's exactly the same thing. And our diameter is going to be 50, so we can use this variable. So what I want to do is, let's say we start with some default x and y value. So let x equals 50, let y equals 50. Okay, so how do we draw a circle? We draw circle, x, y, and d circle, right? So I'm using these variables as inputs. But we are not changing x and y values here. So what it's going to do is, when I run this, 5 circles are overlapping here. How do I know it? Well, if you apply from alpha value, let's say we want to apply some alpha value of 30, and we can do here, for instance, times random, so that you can only see how these circles overlap. When I run this, you can see that it's actually drawing circles at the same location 5 times at a random radius value, right? So what we want to do is basically make them spread a bit. So I want to change, if I want to do this horizontally, I want to change its location. So we can actually override, for instance, the x coordinate for this. So I can actually do, if we start with 50 as our default value, what is going to be my next value? Let's say we want to make them kind of go like this, right? So we want to stack them side by side. So what's their interval is going to be? So if my first x is here, this x is going to be plus 50, right? So this width is 50 because my diameter is 50. So I'm going to basically add diameter in between those. So what I can do is plus I times d circle. right? What this does is when we have I as 0, so this would be 0 basically, but when I is 1, we will be adding the diameter to the x location of the circle. So when I do this, let's see what happens. Now we have 5 circles side by side. And why am I doing it this way? Because I want to be able to control the number of circles, right? So let's say if I want to make 25, now they can keep stacking up. If I want to reduce the diameter, that would also be automatically adjusted, right? I can also change the initial location of where I want to have these objects. I can also have a gap between them, right? How do I specify a gap? So let's say let gap equals 5. So, well, basically, if this is constant, then I can simply add it here. Let's see, when it's 0, 0, let gap equals 5. X, this should be okay, but let's try it again. Maybe 5 is too small. Let's do 55. Oh no, how do we add the gap? Let's think about that. So initial location is here, and we want to go at a location where we use the diameter and a gap. So we want to space these out, basically. Well, how do we do that? So we cannot just add the gap here. What we have to do is we have to add it to the diameter of the circle and multiply it with I, right? Because if initially this is 0, in the next case, the gap will be 5, but then we want to increment it. So now this is basically spaced out, so I can now give it a bit more control. Okay, so that's our basic for loop. So I'm going to wait a bit here, and I want you to test this on your computers. You can also copy my lines, but I'm going to stop for a second and just check if you have any questions. But basically, I want you to create a horizontal row of objects using a for loop. And I'm drawing circles for now, but we will change it to some other geometry later, okay? And if you have any questions, you can turn on your mic or write in the chat. Okay, so let me give you a quick assignment. What I want you to do is I want you to make this in such a way that we start drawing circles in a way that they're actually tightly packed and they fit to this width, right? How do we do that? Basically, let's assume that there's a gap here. This is the same gap, right? So I want the circles to stop here with the same gap. And I want to be able to control the horizontal number of the circles. So we want them to fit perfectly. How do we do that? Does that make sense? So we have a gap value, diameter value, and a number of circles. So some of these have to be formulated basically. So if you want to make this for loop specified or controlled by the number of circles, then you need to basically automatically calculate the gap or the diameter because they will fit to this width, right? So let's assume our gap is 0. So we want them to be tangent like this. So that means that whatever my dimension is, whatever diameter I have, that will specify the x and y, right? So my x would be half of the diameter, and my y could be whatever I want it to be. So if I specify it like this, then it will start at the tangent horizontally. And I'm going to do it no stroke so that we don't get this overlap. Okay, so it starts at the tangent because now I specify the x to be half of its diameter. So let's make it a bit larger. Let's make it 50. And let's make y to be half of the diameter too. Okay, well, they fit right now, but it's kind of an accident because I have 800 by 800 pixels. But let's make the number of circles 5. So we want to specify this in such a way that, let's say when I specify 5, we want to be able to calculate the diameter so that they pack horizontally. Okay, so how do we do that? So when I make this 5, I want 5 circles to fit to the horizontal 800 pixels. When I make this 10, I want 10 circles to fit horizontally. What do I need to change? Anybody? So forget about the gap. We are not using the gap. We have number of circles, diameter, and x and y. And we are not going to change x and y as well. How do we make number of circles control the horizontal packing of these circles? If you know the answer, write in the chat. Like you can say comment like line 10, line 8, and we have to write this. You can submit your answer to the chat. Did everybody understand what I'm asking for? Like I want these circles to stack horizontally. So if I specify 5, I want 5 circles to stack like this, right? And I want them to start on the left border and end at the left border. And if I specify 6, then I want 6 to stack. Like 6 to horizontally pack to this width. So we know what the width is. We know how many circles we want. What do we have to change? How can we automate this? Somebody wrote size, no. So this can be anything as well, right? It just specifies width and height. What we need to do is we want to use the width to override the diameter in some way. So if we want 5 circles to pack horizontally, then we need to divide 800 by 5, right? So that we know what the diameter of each circle has to be. So for instance, if I do width divided by num circle, now I have basically 5 circles packing horizontally. If I want now 8 circles, I will have 8 circles packing horizontally. Why? Because I have 800 pixels horizontally, and I divide it by 8. And the diameter now becomes 100. And the x location starts at 50, y location starts at 50, and so does this formula here. Everything increments by 50, right? So by associating this condition to the diameter of the circle, I'm basically automating the number of circles I can pack horizontally. Okay, let's see, 15, now it's 15. Make sense? Okay, what about the gap? What if I want to create a gap? Well, there's an easy way and a hard way, I would say. We can actually cheat here a bit. So for instance, we could do, we can create a gap value, and we can do the packing with the gap value, but then we won't use it for the diameter value, right? For instance, we can actually do it like this. We could specify, let's say this is the normal packing, but we want to create a gap value of 5. Then I can actually, if I reduce that value from here, that will control the gap. But you can see that the horizontal, like this doesn't fit because it doesn't take into the gap value. Like we want still the same. I also have this here in the formula. We can just take that out. Now it should work actually. Yeah. So now the gap basically reduces the diameter, so we can create this kind of equal gap. But this is kind of tricky because if you remember, gap is if gap is 0, like if I make this 0, then they are tangential to each other. And if I give some, like if I make this 5 and reduce it from the diameter, then we will have we will have a gap of 5 on the left and on the right, but in between we will have a gap of 10, right? So if you want to make it equal, then we have to have a different formula. Let's actually not worry about it for now, but let's say that we can actually control it this way, okay? Okay, so I want to continue. The next thing I want to do is, let's make it 10. And if you remember, how do we make these circles, the fills random colored? So we could actually do fill, right? And let's do random 255, a random hue of red. Let's do 60 and 20. I'm just throwing out some RGB value. And let's see what this does. So we get a different color for each of these circles. Let's actually make this between 150 and 255. So it's kind of a tone of red now. Okay, tone of red or tone of orange. Now, what I want to do is make this vertically as well. How do we make it kind of a grid of objects? How can we do that? Any idea? So we were able to make a horizontal row of objects. What about the vertical? How can we make this into a grid? Let's say I have a variable here specifying kind of like if I specify it to be 10, this specifies how many I want horizontally and vertically. How can we achieve it? Any idea?
Make a different color.
No, I'm not talking about the color. I'm talking about a grid of objects, right? So we have these circles running only horizontally. So these are running in the x direction. But I want to create it kind of in a grid and fill it all the way up. How am I going to make the same thing run in the vertical as well? How can we do that?
Maybe y plus x or.
So you're saying that we can do it by changing the y?
Yes.
Okay, how do we do it?
Y plus x maybe.
So just y plus x. So I just change here, line 12.
Yes.
Okay, so let's say y plus b circle.
Not plus is kaksim actually.
Say it again.
Kaksim ya
So plus d
Aksim
circle.
maybe.
Here, you want here.
Yes.
So what do if I do that, then the row moves vertically, right? So I start from a more incremented y value. What I want to do though is create a grid of objects, not just a single horizontal row.
Ya şöyle yamuk olan bir şey vardı ya, onun kaksim olmuyor mu dedi?
Can you say it in English?
I don't know the name of the lecture. I wrote the text.
Let's see, somebody wrote in the chat.
I did.
With length. Well, no. So let's do this in a simpler way, okay? So I'm going to reduce the dimension. Let's do it 300 by 300. And let's reduce the number to be 3, okay? So we have only 3 circles right now. And I'm going to take this out here. So what I want to do is this for loop creates, runs in the horizontal dimension, right? It runs in the x dimension. Why? Because I'm only changing the x here, you see? So the I coefficient starts at 0 and goes up to number of circles. Right now, number of circles are 3. And what I do is I have an initial x value, which is the half of the diameter. So it's here. Let me actually draw it in another color. It's here. And when I is 0, this is 0. And x is half of its diameter. What is d circle? D circle is width divided by number of circles. So width is 300 divided by 3. D circle is 100, right? So my x starts by half of it. So this is 50. So my initial x value is 50. So this guy is 50. Y is 50 as well. And D circle is dimension of circle is 100. Minus 5, but don't worry about it. So this is, the dimension is 90 or 95, sort of. So y is 50, x is 50, and we start by this location. Then we increment only I, right? So the next step is I becomes 1, right? When I is 1, we increment x, which was 50, by 1 times d circle. D circle is, remember, it is 100. So we just add 100 to 50. Everything else is the same. So what we are doing is we start with x to be 50, but then we are moving it here. X becomes 150. And then we move it here again. When I is 2, x becomes 250. Make sense? That's all this for loop does. So it just gives me 3 circles in the horizontal direction. Now, what I want to do is make this into a grid of objects. So I want it to run in the x and the y direction. So how do I do that? So I want circles here as well, right? I want to see a total of 9 circles in this case. How do I do that? Any idea? So just incrementing
Can
y.
we create different line for the every each circle?
That's a good idea. So let's say that you want to copy the for loop, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's copy the for loop. So here's another for loop, but this time we don't want to use y. We want to increment it by the circle over 2, right? So what this does is it is going to get the diameter and it's going to increment it in the horizontal direction. So if I add the secondary for loop, and if I run it, oh, this is going to be actually the circle. Now this is the second row, right? Now for the third row, one more time, but this time the circle times 2, right? Now I get the third row. Is that how you say we should do it?
Yes, but maybe not create. We can make a one circle and different location.
Yeah,
Not start. We can maybe second time the second line. We start not 0 in the middle of the page.
I didn't quite get that, but let's say that this is how we want to do it. So we want to create another for loop in every horizontal direction. Right? The problem here is when I change the number of circles, we will only create 3 horizontal rows, no matter what, right? So if I say, if I want this to be 5, for instance, what's going to happen is when I run this, we will only create 3 rows because we are only running in the vertical direction 3 times by using 3 separate loops. So I also want this to be automated, right? So we cannot do it this way. We cannot do one for loop for every horizontal running. That makes sense? Do you see why it doesn't work? Like if I make this 8, then 3 rows, but 8 in the horizontal direction. I want this 8 by 8. So I need 8 for loops here, but I cannot go back in and write 5 more loops when this parameter can change. Does everybody understand the problem here? So how do we fix this? How do we fix this? So let's look at it. So what if, just like we created a for loop, use a while loop maybe? Good idea. Well, we could use a while loop, but we actually don't need it. We already have something here, which is this I variable. But what if we want to create a secondary loop inside of this for loop, and we iterate both x and y, right? So that's called a double for loop, basically. Because keep in mind that this only allows us to draw in a horizontal row, but we need to increment y as well, right? For every vertical row, we want to increment y. So one way of doing it would be to write another for loop here for, let's say, another copy here for let j. Let's call that j and j++. So what this does is, let me actually show you what how the double for loop works. So I'm going to do it this way and keep number of circles 3. So here I'm going to print x value. X value is plus x strx. I'm just doing it this way so that we can see what's going to happen inside the while inside the for loops. Okay, and this is I value, and this is J value, stri, strj. So this allows me to print these values. So now we have a double for loop. So what's going to happen is it's going to start with this for loop, and it's going to execute another for loop inside of it. So the second for loop is nested inside of it. So when I is 0, it's going to go through all the values of j. And when all the values of j are finished, then it's going to switch to the second I value and go through again all the values of j. Okay, so when I run this, let's see what happens here. So when I is 0, j is 0, I is still 0, j is 1, I is still 0, j is 2. And when we have this, this I is 1, j value is 0, I value is 1 now. So I value is incremented to 1. You see here, let's see, this block is I equals 0. This block is I equals 1. This block is I equals 2. Makes sense? But it's going through all the j values for each I value. Okay, this might be a bit hard to grasp right now because it's the first time you guys are seeing this, and maybe it's a bit advanced, although I don't think it is. But once you understand how this works, then technically you will grasp a lot of programming knowledge. All I'm doing is I'm creating a double loop here, and I'm iterating through all the possible values. So remember that when we don't have the secondary for loop, and when I'm doing this, we only create a single horizontal line of objects. Why? Because we are only iterating I, and my x dimension, x location of the circle is run or manipulated by I. There's nothing to override its y value yet. So now what I can do is I can create a secondary for loop that iterates with j, and I can use a similar formula that adds to the y location. So j times the circle. What this is going to do is it's going to create a double array. So now I have consolidated all of it, right? So x is run by I, j is run by y. And if I make this 8 now we will have as many as we want. So I can now have 20. So we don't have to go around and write 20 lines of for loops, right? We can just automate the processing of it. Because we are drawing a grid, we just have to revisit all the x and y locations along the grid. And I'm just plotting a circle at those locations. That's all I'm doing. Okay, let's actually make this 2, and let's make this 15. All right. So that's basically a double for loop. I'll give a break here. Let's give a break for 10 minutes. I want you to look at this code and try to get this image, okay? And if you have any questions, just write up in the chat. I'll see you guys in like 10 minutes. All right, let's give it a short break. I'm actually going to do, well, maybe not circles, but rectangles. So how do we do that? We can, again, do rect. We want to do same x and y location. And let's do, we did this circle, but we have to do it probably double. And we need to specify rect mode. So if I do rect mode center, we should have squares instead of circles with a gap. So we got tiles. Let's actually make them a tone of blue. This is a bit dark. Can we make it a bit lighter? Well, it's 100. Okay, so background. This is black. This is white. All right. So let's make it 10 by 10 grid. Let's add some other functionality on top of this. So we already did the for loop. What I want to do is actually draw a random shape inside of these grids. So imagine these squares as kind of reserved spaces for some shape, let's say. So before doing this for loop, we need to go over how to draw shapes. Shall I wait a bit more, or shall I continue? Let me see. Osman, do you have any question?
No, but I can show you my work if you want.
Oh, can you do it, or you need help?
No, I did.
You did. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's working on yours as well.
But I just can try to change the color. But I couldn't find which cog is the color. Get one, the file.
So the fill basically assigns a fill color to
Oh,
these
okay.
tiles, right? So we are having no stroke, so we don't draw the borders. We just have a fill value, and you can just specify it to be anything you want. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm actually going to leave this and draw, like switch to another thing. I want to do. I want to basically show you how you can draw custom objects or custom shapes here as well. So let's go to our reference, and we're going to look at begin shape. So the way begin shape works is it's basically allowing us to draw custom shapes using vertices. So remember that the way we draw a rectangle is we have a rectangle. If I use the center mode, I specify the X and Y location of it, and then I specify a width and a height for a rectangle. When we do it with begin shape, we are supplying it with vertices. So these corners are basically vertices, right? So I can use that to draw any custom shape. So let's actually make this into kind of an exercise. So you can see that we have a bunch of ways of drawing shapes. So we can draw points, we can draw lines, we can draw triangles, triangle strips, quads. Quads will be basically kind of rectangles as well. So this is drawing two separate shapes. What I want to draw is a polygon. Let me see if we have a polygon. Well, we don't. Let's see if, how can we draw a polygon? Let's try to draw a polygon. So I'm going to comment this section out. So we start with an empty canvas. Let's do 220 for the gray. And look at begin shape, okay? So let's draw a custom shape in the middle. How do we do it with begin shape? So I specify begin shape, which basically starts the drawing function. And then the second thing I want to do is specify vertices. So let's do vertex 1 is, where do we want to specify the vertex? So let's say we want to draw, if this is the midpoint, this is basically width divided by height, width divided by 2, height divided by 2. And I want to specify these vertices, right? So these are let's say I want to draw a shape like that. So this is V1, V2, V3, and V4. And we want to specify the X and Y location of these vertices. So how do we do it? Let's find the center X. So let's just let center X equals width divided by 2. Let center Y equals height divided by 2. So the first vertex is going to be center X minus, let's give it a dimension. Let B equals 50 minus D, comma, center Y minus D. So I'm moving up from the center. The second is going to be center X plus D, center Y minus D. The fourth is going to be center X plus D, center Y plus D. And the fourth is going to be center X minus D, center Y plus D. And then I'm going to do close and shape and do close. So we get a rectangle again, right? So this begin shape is basically what we did is let me explain this code. I specified two variables, which is basically the center X and center Y. So it's basically the center of our canvas, right? Because I'm using width and height divided by 2. So it's the center of the canvas. And I specified a dimension parameter, which is 50. So what happens is the first vertex here, line 29, the first vertex is center X minus D. So center X is here, minus D is I'm moving in the negative direction, and center Y minus D, I'm moving in the positive direction. So I find this location right here. So this is vertex 1, line 29, right? So if rather than moving in the negative direction from the center, if I move in the positive direction, so I'm moving in this direction, I find this location here. This is vertex 2, line 30. And if I do both positive movements, so I move here, this is V3. If I do negative movement in the X, positive movement in the Y, I move here, so this is V4. Okay? But there's an advantage of drawing the rectangle like this. Why? Because I'm controlling the location of each vertex individually. So for instance, if I were to add some value here, let's make this 100. Now, I'm incrementing the by value of that corner, right? So I can also do it here on this 100. So now I can draw like other types of shapes as well. Make sense? So all it's doing is it's visiting these corner points that I specify with X and Y values, and then I'm closing the shape. And because I have a fill value, I'm filling it with black, but I don't have any stroke value. I'm just drawing this custom polygon shape by inputting these corner vertices, right? And I have some parameters here as well. So we could also do, for instance, I can also do stroke 0 and no fill. If I do it like this, now I'll be drawing just the border of that custom shape. So I have some noise. I'm going to close the door. Okay. Makes sense. So this is begin shape, end shape. Close basically connects the last vertex to the first vertex. If I don't write close here, it basically just visits these vertices and keeps the last connection open. Okay, it's like drawing a polyline. But because I specified to be no fill and I'm specifying a stroke value, now it's just drawing a line. But we can also draw some custom shapes now. with this function. Okay, let's actually try this. Let's try to use this. I'll wait for you to create a custom shape on the canvas. By the way, this doesn't have to be a four-sided polygon. We could specify as many vertices as we want, right? So let's say we want let me actually enter some more values. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but let's say minus, and this is 50. Right, so I entered two more lines, but let's actually try to make this a bit more concise. So maybe we visit here, but then we close here. So last one I'm going to take out, and then I'm going to do close here. Right, so maybe it's a shape like this. It's a polygon, five-sided polygon, because I'm inputting 5 vertices. Okay, I'll wait for everybody to create a custom polygon using begin shape and end shape. So these are keywords. So when you do begin shape, you're basically putting vertex information, and vertex takes X and Y locations, right? So this is X, this is Y. So because we are drawing on the canvas, we are specifying X, Y coordinates. So we are specifying each vertex, and then end shape closes that shape.
Hocam bir şey sorabilir miyim?
In English.
Okay. You know the vertex, you wrote the lots of different vertex for the point. So you wrote just a copy, or every time we need to write again and again?
So we need to write vertex every time. Yeah, because
Every time?
begin shape. Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to see actually whether we could do a for loop for vertex begin shape, or I don't think it was enabled, but let's see. JavaScript. It's processing. There's also a shipment tutorial here. Custom shapes. You can also look at that. Shape with for loop. Well, there's a way we could draw custom shapes. So this is an example, but basically it's allowing us to draw a polygon. This was the next thing I was going to do, but basically we can write begin shape and end shape, and inside of it we can write a for loop, right? And this is drawing a polygon. So maybe we can copy this code as well. So I'm going to take this out. We can also use the translate function. Well, there are actually a bunch of advantages to using the translate function. Well, maybe we can also take this part of the code and see what we can come up with here. But this is basically doing a radius, number of sides. So we can do, for instance, 12. If I do 12, it's a 12-sided polygon. We can do background 255, stroke value to be, let's say black, stroke weight to be 2. And it's yellow as a fill. So the radius value basically specifies how you want to specify the X and Y locations for the vertices, right? So this is because we're drawing a polygon with the number, we are controlling the number of sides. We need to find, well, we start with the cosine and the sine functions. So the way this works is you basically use a 360-degree angle, but you divide it into increments. So if you are drawing a 12-sided polygon, then 360 divided by 12 means 30. So you start with I0. So you start with sine 0 and cosine 0. Sine 0 is basically, sine 0 is 0, but cosine 0 is 1. So X basically goes in the horizontal direction, but Y doesn't go. So we find this point here. This is our first point. For the second point, we are using 30-degree angle. So sine 30 times radius and cosine 30 times radius for X, which basically gives us this point here. So we are going, I guess, counterclockwise. One way to visualize this would be how circles are drawn. So basically, you have a circle is basically like an infinite vertex polygon, right? So it's also drawn with cosine and sine functions and the radius value. But here we are making increments at a certain angle. So these are kind of like how we go. So when the first angle is 0, y is 0, but x is 1. So we find this point, and then we go by 30-degree increments for 12 sides. Let's make this 8-sided polygon. So now we start with this point here. This is our first point, and this is the second point. The angle is 45 degrees. So the x location, this increment here, this x, is x equals cosine 45. Cosine 45 times radius. And the y location here, this y location of this vertex here is sine 45 times radius. That's how we find this vertex. So the first vertex here, second vertex is here, third vertex is here. So for third vertex, for instance, we are using cosine 90 for x, which is 0, sine 90 for y, which is 1. So we go by amount of radius here in the y direction, and we find this vertex here. Okay, maybe we use this function rather than drawing. How about rather than drawing circles, we draw random polygons? How about that? Shall we do that? What do you guys think? We can also do it like this. I can make this into a fun, like a fun example, for instance, times random and times random. Well, that's too fast, but let's actually do this. Close and frame rates 4. Now we are drawing custom shapes. So random 0.5, 0.8. Let's give it an interval so that it's kind of similar, but you can see that the first and the last values are different. So maybe we do it like this. Custom polygons, animate. Keep in mind, I'm doing this inside the draw function. Right, and let's increase the number of sides to 20. Shall we use this to make an array of random objects? What do you guys think? I'll send you the link to this. This is probably shared, but if you want to access this, this is where it's located. I'm overriding it with some random functions and parameters, but shall we do it here again? What do you guys think? So let's do it like this. Let's do this inside the setup, okay? So background white, 800 by 800. Stroke is 0, stroke weight is 2, and fill is black. So we're just going to do a black and white drawing. And we are going to translate it. So what translate does is, you remember we have a canvas, right? So this is, let's actually fill the background to 220. So this is the canvas. So what translate does is, it basically shifts the origin to a location. So remember that our origin is here, 0, 0, this corner, right? When I specify translate width divided by height, 2, height divided by 2, which is 400 by 400, basically moves this origin to the midpoint here. So whatever I'm doing in draw, I'm doing it here, right? So for instance, if I take this out, if I take the translate out, it will draw my shape here at the origin. But translate allows me to place it anywhere on the canvas. So for instance, if I do width divided by 4, now I'm moving 200 pixels in the horizontal dimension and 400 pixels in the vertical dimension. So I'm finding the center point now. So I'm drawing my shape here in place. So begin shape treats this new origin for the shape, or drawing a shape. So we can actually use this to create the for loop, right? So the double for loop or double array that we wanted to create. For instance, let me actually take this out, the random. So I'm going back to the initial polygon. It's a 20-sided polygon. Let's actually make it 8-sided. So I have a radius of 100, 8-sided polygon. This is how I draw it, okay? So where's my double array? I'm going to now merge the two scripts. We can actually do it by moving this as well. So I'm going to move this section to the other code that I have here. So I'm going to take this out and paste it here. And let's see what we can do. So remember that we had a grid, right? So this was my grid. And I'm going to switch back to circle. Right? The gap is 4 or 5. Let's make the gap a bit more. So these are the locations of where I want to draw the circle. By the way, we don't have to do this here. You see that we are doing x plus I times y plus j times. We can also use the translate function. For instance, I can do translate, and rather than using x and y, I can basically do, let's actually, how shall we do this? X starts with some value. We could probably do it like this, translate to x and translate to y. And I can do 0, 0. So I want to draw the origin. So translate takes care of relocating my origin using the x, I, and j. Oh, what happened? So let's see, we made a mistake. Translate plus I times d circle y plus. Let's see, this is kind of going crazy. Oh, because we are translating every time. Maybe we cannot do that. I guess we cannot do this, but what we could do is I times, not I times, but plus probably. Okay, this is taking diagonal. And we probably have to do translate XY and take this out. Now this is going to keep moving diagonally. Probably I'm confusing all of you at the moment. Maybe we shouldn't do it this way. I guess you will be more confused. But it's kind of useful the way we want to draw these polygons. What I'm trying to do is, for each circle, I want to specify its origin as the new translation. But the problem with that is, well, we want to make it in such a way that we specify where we want to move every time. So probably we have to do push and pull matrix operations, because translate just like keeps moving the origin, right? So if I, for instance, translate once, then I have a new origin, then I translate from that origin. So I keep adding these translate operations on top of each other. So that's kind of an issue. So maybe we skip it for now. I'm going to go back to the original version so that you don't get confused. But let's go back to this version. Rather than using translate, I will just use the X and Y location to draw polygons. Okay, so rather than drawing circles, I'm just going to do a begin shape inside this for loop, double for loop, and draw a shape, draw a polygon. So I'm going to take out the circle. So what I want to do is type in begin shape and end shape. And in between, I specify a new for loop, but this time we cannot use I because it's already being used here. Let's do this for var k and k smaller than sides, and let's specify sides parameter, let sides equals 8. We already specifying X and Y here, so we will probably have to do X plus cosine, Y plus cosine, Y plus sine. Is this correct? And this is going to be K. Is this correct? Let's see. It's giving me an error. Radius is not defined. Well, let's do d circle. D circle divided by 2. All right, we have a polygon there, but we didn't get the grid yet. Why not? So I'm done with this part. Begin shape. So right now, this is just specifying it based on the number of sides, right? And cosine and sine, that's basically, I just copied the polygon code, but we have to find their new locations. So we need to increment these from X and Y locations. So I probably have a mistake here. So remember that we are specifying an initial origin. So we have these functions here where we draw the circles, right? So if I were to do this, for instance, go back to this version, to the circles. So this is the grid. So we have an origin for the circle, these X and Y locations. I need to use them here. So basically, we can actually do it this way. So we could do let Vx and let Vy. And I can use these as the vertex X and Y locations. And I can copy this as my origin for the X and copy this for the origin of my y. Comment this down. This will probably work. Now we have octagons as a grid. Okay, so this is the origin, the x origin. This part calculates the cosine, and this is the radius value. So this third for loop inside the double for loop, it basically allows me to draw a polygon shape with a bunch of sides. So right now I'm drawing 8-sided polygons. So the number of sides is 8. So let's make it 12, for instance. Now they're 12-sided. You can also make it hexagonal. Now they're hexagons, right? But 8-sided polygons pack a lot better because they are kind of based on circle as well. So let's go back to 8. Okay. And so begin shape, number of sides. I'm calculating every x and y location. And what happens when we don't do close? So we get an open side. Okay. So let's do close. So I'm calculating the vertices of each octagons at each center location, and I'm just drawing the polygon. Okay. So now we have merged the two scripts. I'll wait here for you to copy this code. I also sent you this version. You can also copy some of this portion and try to merge them. You don't have to use the variables that I defined, but be careful. The third for loop needs to operate independently, right? So the first four loops define the x and y locations of the geometries that we want to draw. And then the third for loop basically draws a polygon at that new origin location. I was planning to use translate, but translate is going to be a bit more complex to explain right now because we need to control the translation matrix of how we update the origin of plotting any geometry. So let's not get into that. For now, we are just calculating in place. So we find the location of each of these geometries and we are drawing, we are finding its vertices and drawing it, okay? So I'll wait here a bit for you to draw, for you to get the sketch. And then my last thing would be to randomize the number of sides and to randomize the shapes basically some way. But we're going to plot them in a grid. And let me know if you have any questions for now. Okay, so we have we have only like 15 minutes. I'm going to keep it short today, but let's finish this exercise, okay? So first thing I want to do is just work on one polygon. So I'm going to reduce the number of polygons to 3. And then the next thing I want to do is change this parameter here inside the for loop to 1 so that we are only drawing one polygon here. So what I want to do is be able to randomize the number of sides of this shape and randomize how it's drawn. So basically, to randomize this shape, we have, let's call this a maximum value. We want to just multiply it with some random function. Let's say random 0.3 to 0.9. And let's do something similar for the y location of the vertex. So that will give me just a custom shape every time, right? But keep in mind, the way this is drawn is what's happening is, let's say that we have a polygon. So every time I'm trying to find a vertex, let's say this vertex is based on an octagon. What I'm doing is I'm not going to the actual location of the vertex on the octagon. I'm going a certain percentage of it, right? So I'm doing kind of along these lines. I'm finding these points. So these points are always at between 30% to 90% of this radius length. So I'm getting random points like this, but within those lines, and then I'm connecting them. Okay, so some of them could be far out long, some of them could be short. It's giving me kind of these nice shapes. We can also make it maybe a bit more drastic. Let's do it 0.1. Yeah, it's giving like these custom shapes basically. Okay, and let's do it for all the circles. So now they're all randomized. And the last thing I want to do is change the number of sides that I want to have. So remember that we have a sides parameter here, which is specified at 8. And I want to randomize it for each shape, right? So what I can do is here, I can call let sides, but make it an integer and call it a random. Let's say we want to draw between triangles and 24-sided polygons. So we specify this will basically give me a random value between 3 and 24. So let's say that value is 20. Then my polygon is going to be 20-sided polygon. And the next time when this line is hit, it's going to give me a different number of sides, right? So if I run this now some of them have a lot more different sides. Well, let's see, some of them are actually not correctly drawn. So I'm wondering if I have a mistake in my code. Maybe let's take this close function out. So let's see what's going on. Okay, I guess this is correct, but let's see. How could this happen? Can it actually self-intersect like this? If I find this point, this shouldn't be a problem actually. Let's do 12. Oh, let me do 24. I guess if it moves too far out, and if it moves too less out, and then too far out again, like coming back here, I don't think there should be an issue. Why do we write fill and no fill? Why do we write fill and no fill both? Well, it actually happens in a sequence, right? So if I'm specifying fill here, this doesn't actually take much effect. I just kept these there, like I could just delete them. This doesn't actually mean anything. Okay. I'm still wondering why this is happening. Because probably the stroke is kind of overlapping. Like this stroke cap type is maybe affecting it. So we can do stroke cap. This is how it's written. Let's find the P5 reference. Stroke cap. Yeah, stroke cap. Let's make it round and see what we get. Stroke cap round. I guess much better. Yeah, probably that was a stroke cap issue. Now you can see that they're actually a bit more smoothed out. Let's make this 20 again. Well, I'm wondering why we're getting shapes like this. So shall we do maybe we should draw a line to these vertices as well. So we could do something like this. So rather than doing begin shape, end shape, we could just do line and line bx, by to the origin. So the origin is here. This is x and this is y. So this secondary for loop will actually create a line. I'm wondering if we could just input this here, but we have a begin shape. It might actually create a problem. Let's see. No, it doesn't like that. Right, what about this? All right, so those are the lines. So what's happening? Why don't we find a vertex? These don't seem correct to me. Oh, because we also have them randomized. Well, and we're getting random lines basically at these corner locations. So these are the axes. Okay. Why would this happen? Plus this times, okay, I guess that's correct. So we're just changing the random. Okay. Cosine and sine. That's also correct. Let's look at here. Yeah, I'm wondering why this is happening. Is it because this plus cosine times the circle? I guess this might be it. Oh, it's already multiplication, so why should that be an issue? I guess it's changing the x and y value. Maybe that's the issue. So this is the origin, the cosine. All right, I guess we might have to vectorize this. Well, let's do close. There's a small issue here that I need to fix. You see, I'm not too fond of these shapes, so we need to probably fix them somehow. But sometimes it gives like some nice shapes, like they're like blotted shapes. And this is kind of picking from random numbers of sides. But the x and y, the cosine and sine, they should be fixed actually, so they shouldn't change. All I'm trying to change is the amount of how much we move. I guess the issue is when we use different random values for x and y, this becomes an issue. So what we could do is like let rad equals random 0, 1, 0, 9. So this has to be the same value for both x and y, because when they change, I guess this issue presents itself like this kind of twist. So we have to multiply it with rad here. So now we will always have convex shapes. You see, now I fixed the issue. So now they're not self-intersecting, basically. The reason why they were self-intersecting is because I was calculating a random value for both x and y value of the vertex. And when they're not the same, the sine and cosine doesn't work the same way because we are getting different rotations as well. So this way, this fixes it. So we could actually increment this to like a really high number now. They will always be convex. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to do is change the number of circles. And now we have custom shapes, basically. Okay, it's an array of custom shapes. And every time I hit press play, we will get a different array. We could also increase the canvas size. Reduce the gap to be 0. And we can also change these. For instance, we can make this 1. And we can make this 25. Okay, that's pretty much it for today. So I'll let you play around with this. You can also randomize the colors RGB style like this. So we plotted custom shapes, and we also learned about double arrays. So we start with an X and Y grid of objects, which were rectangles and circles. So we basically iterated through 4 loops that increment. And then I also wanted to show you begin shape and end shape, which basically is used to draw vector-based geometries. So keep in mind, like rectangle can also be drawn with vertices, right? So we just input 4 custom vertices. And this allows me to actually create any number of sides of polygons. So I also randomized it. So we can create triangles and 32 sides polygons. For instance, if I make this 5, we will have probably more triangles. And if I make it up to 8, then these will be like more primitive shapes. But the more vertices we have, the more complexity we get. So let's do 24. Right, so minimum is 12 now, maximum is 24, so they will all be like they will all have 12 vertices. And then this also randomizes how each vertex is placed. And I'm drawing a custom shape. So we ended up actually creating a triple for loop. So the first 2 for loops creates the X and Y grid, and the last one creates the polygon shapes. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. So there will be an assignment about this. Basically, I'll want you to create a sketch using these custom vertex objects, but I think we have covered a lot of ground here, so you can experiment a lot with these techniques and come up with a sketch that can output variations. Basically, I'll specify more in the assignment. But yeah, let me stop here and see if you have any questions.
Cool
So
hard.
Huh?
Cool hard.
It's so hard, you said?
Yes. It's very so hard.
Well, this ended up being a bit more complex than I anticipated. I'm sorry if this was like super hard. I just wanted to do like for loops, but then I just like added the custom shape inside of it. So why not? I think what could be confusing is like all this calculation here with cosine and sine. That's why like I want to show you this sketch, which basically just has a custom n-sided polygon, and it shows you how it's drawn. If you want to learn more about these cosine and sine functions, you can actually go to the trigonometry page on Wikipedia. This is basically how sine and cosine are calculated, right? So the cosine is basically the projection on x, and sine is the projection on y. So when we are drawing a circle, these are used, but basically when you're drawing a polygon, you're actually calculating these vertex points at certain angles, right? So this is 45, this is 0, this is 90, 135, 180, 215, 225. and then 270, 315, and 360, right? So these are the locations of the vertices for the octagon. And this angle is used to calculate the x and y location of each of these vertices. That's all it's doing actually. So the sketch is making it for any number of sides. So when it's 8, this is drawn. When it's 12, this is drawn. And I just took this part and randomized the number of sides and randomized how radius is taken into effect, right? So when radius is constant between vertices, you get a regular shaped polygon. But when I multiply it with the random coefficient, which I used here, when I multiply it with a coefficient, the radius value, I get different shapes created. So this part is exactly the same. And this part is basically the origin of my circle. So I can just comment this part out. These are circles, right? So what I'm doing inside here is I'm just generating number of sides, random number of sides, and just overriding a coefficient for the radius value so that the polygons are not regular, so they're kind of like jittered. Okay, I understand this might seem a bit complex, but if you spend some time and play around with it, I think there's a lot to learn here. But just keep in mind, this is like a 35-line script, and you just have to like study this a bit and learn what it does. So I guess the for loops are kind of straightforward, and they could be nested. And begin shape, end shape, it just allows you to draw a custom shape. And we can also use for loops for that. Okay. It could also be like this. You could also probably do like these could also be hollowed out. For instance, if I do the same fill for the background, yeah, they will look like they're kind of taken out, right? Do we have the gap working still? Well, some of them now go out because we don't use gap here. All right, any questions? I'll send you the script to experiment with it. And if you have any questions, just let me know. I'll also post a simple assignment for your first scripting exercise using JavaScript. And you saw like how I'm working with this, right? So you can use the reference, you can look at online codes. There's a lot of open source scripts out there, also resources where you can watch other tutorials. So I would urge you to look into that material, but also in your own free time, like get to learn more about this. Don't get too carried away with these like calculations. They're just like mathematical calculations, pluses and minuses. Of course, this might be intimidating a bit, but we started with a simple calculation, simple idea of packing objects in a grid using for loops, and then I built on top of that complexity. Okay. All right. Let me know if you have any questions now. Otherwise, that will be it for today, and we will continue next week with a guest lecture and a new tutorial. All right, any questions? Did everybody get the grid? Grid of objects, grid of circles, grid of rectangles. If you got that, that's a good start. This part was a bit complex, I admit, but I think if you put your mind into it and also look at this, how this is drawn, like look at the cosine and sine, try to understand it a bit more. Like we can also do some trigonometric stuff next week if you like. I think you will understand how this works, okay? All right, so there's a lot to digest, but spend some time on this code. I'll send it to you, and I'll see you guys next week. All right, and have a nice week. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Thank you, Archbishop.